Welcome to Reflecting Back podcast with Michelle. I am Michelle Nelson, and I have Jill Jamieson with me. I should say author, Jill. How are you doing today, Jill?
I'm doing great. It still is really weird to hear author in front of my name, and I'm sure I'll explain a little bit more of why that is. But thank you. It's so good to just be with you today.
Oh well, it's my privilege to have you, and I am looking forward to learning about the book that you wrote. And you always haven't been an author, right?
No,
Mhm.
I have never aspired to write a book, and that's just really honest. But years ago, I just felt like the Lord was telling me one day I'd write a book. And this was even before a healing process I went through. So I had no idea what that book would be about. But the other thing is, I don't love to read.
Mhm.
And I wouldn't call myself a writer. So every time I would sense that the Lord was telling me one day you're going to write a book, my next thing was, well, you're going to have to help me. And so this has been a 22-year process. I went through a healing 22 years ago, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. But it wasn't right away that he said, okay, now write it. He wanted me to walk free
Mm.
enough to
Mhm.
be able to help other people
Mhm.
walk free. So that's my passion.
That's good. Let's talk about the walk free journey.
Okay.
That's a bold, it's a beautiful and bold statement. Walk free. And is that the 22-year journey that you're talking about? The walk
It
free?
is. It
Mm.
is.
Okay, well,
Because
tell us
for,
about it.
okay. So for so many years, and my freedom came, I believe, when I was 36. So actually, I'm pretty much, dating myself or aging myself. But I walked so many years of my life in bondage, is what I would say. But the thing is, I didn't realize I was in bondage. I knew I had a secret that I had brought from my past that I was trying to work around, keep hidden, just bury it and move on. And so when my radical healing came and I got freedom, it was important to me to not let the enemy have any ground back. I took back a lot of ground from the enemy. And so my desire, not even, okay, how can I share this with others, Lord? It was, I don't want the enemy to have any ground back. You're going to have to help me. And so that's what the 22-year so far walk has been.
Mm. Mm.
And so that's what I'm passionate about. The book, the first part of it is my story. It's a memoir.
Mhm.
And so the first part is my story.
What
But
what age does the story begin?
um, about 8,
About
I
8.
would
Okay.
say, about 8.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and so the first part's my story, which you can insert anybody's story. We all have
Mhm.
a story to tell. But the second part of the book is what really the Lord wanted me to impress upon people is how did how did you walk, or Lord, how did you help me walk free? Because
Mhm.
without the Lord, I couldn't have done it. And so that took a little bit of work. And I'm sure we'll unpack
Yeah.
that.
So, do you
Okay.
mind sharing a little bit about your
No,
journey?
I don't mind at all. So, I was raised in Northeast Arkansas, small town, and my parents took us to church. So I had a knowledge, a really healthy knowledge, growing up of the Lord. Though for me, I was a very believing child. So I believed in everything, like Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, and Jesus. So
Mhm.
at some point when I was probably 8 years old, I found out in a very humiliating way that Santa Claus wasn't real. My peers, who were supposed to be my safe space, made fun of me.
Mm.
And so inside,
What what'd that look like? Um,
how they said that, well,
mhm, mhm,
it must have been around Christmas, and I was probably very excited about the visit from Santa Claus, and I was probably
mhm.
talking about it. And
Sure.
I remember what they said was, only babies believe in Santa Claus.
Mm. Mm.
And so inside, I'm thinking a couple things. Like the first thing is, what? What do you mean
It's
he's
not
not
real?
real? What do you mean? Why are my parents perpetuating this lie? So that's going on. But I
Mm.
am in such need of saving face, even
Mm.
then, that I quickly said, oh, I know that, so and so still believes. And so I was just saying that for them. So I'm covering my tracks to look normal on the outside, because that's
Mm.
one of my special gifts, is look normal on the outside and crumble away on the inside.
Sure.
So, but inside I'm thinking, okay, my parents are perpetuating this lie. I mean, what else is not true? So at
Hmm.
that point, I just threw away everything. Jesus, the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny,
So you
Santa
clumped it
Claus.
all together and just
Oh,
threw them
Jesus was
away. Yeah.
right in there. And
Hmm.
I realized if I'd have gone home and talked to my mom about what happened that day, she would have assured me that Jesus is real, that,
Hmm.
he's not make believe, he is actually true. But I didn't. I was a
Hmm.
very internal child. So I just kept all that in and thought, well, great, I'm not going to be humiliated again. And
Hmm.
so kept going to church because
Hmm.
that's what, good girls do. But
Sure.
inside, I'm thinking, okay, one day you guys are going to find out this has all been a lie.
Hmm.
And I'm not going to have the rug jerked out from under me again. So I'll just be there to go, well, I could have told you that.
Yeah.
So anyway,
And Jill,
that's
what you mentioned, you were an internal child. What's that mean?
I processed everything inside. I didn't talk to people if I was scared, if I
Mm.
was anything. I just didn't talk. I processed a lot inside,
Okay.
which when you give, Jesus, and I hate to say this, give Jesus the boot, which I did,
Hmm.
well, that leaves the room for the enemy
Mm.
just to get in. And so for someone who's an internal child, I would
Hmm.
say he just has a heyday.
Yeah. Now,
Because
were
we
you
talk.
always an internal child, or that moment in time when they made fun of
I
you
think
that
I
made you?
always was. I think
Okay.
I've always been pretty introspective.
Hmm.
At a young age, you don't think of yourself that way. But based on how I process things, how I processed finding out Santa Claus isn't real, I didn't go home and talk to my parents. Maybe I was ashamed. Maybe I
Mm.
was way confused at why they were, still perpetuating this Santa Claus thing.
Sure.
So that's what I mean with the being an internal child. And again, I think that helped with the facade of everything looks normal on the outside. Keep
Mm.
it normal.
Hmm.
Just die on the inside. And so again,
Mm.
I call that my special gift because a lot of the things I went through in my young age, none of my friend group had any idea
Mm.
that I was struggling in such a way. Um,
Mm.
but so around this time that again, I have ushered, the Lord uh, out because I just don't believe um, the enemy was kind of allowed in our home and, in the means of pornography.
Mm.
And
Okay.
so I was sexualized at a really young age. And by that, I just mean I was exposed to things that I could not process. I was 8 or 9 when I
Mm.
found this. And you just cannot process this. And again, this is in the 70s.
Sure.
On that day, it's not on our little handheld devices. It's not on our computers. It's not,
Hmm.
even at that point, it wasn't on TV as it
Hmm.
is today, but it came in the mail and it was very discreet. And I will say, it was brought in our home very discreet. It was hidden. It was never intended to be found, but
Mm.
I'm a very curious child.
Hmm.
So I love to just kind of nose around in things that were off limits for me, but I did it anyway. So I found that, and I would love to say that when I saw it, I was so confused and humiliated and just sickened that I ran away, never to go back. But that's not what happens. There's something in our brains, and I have since gone back to ask this question. And I was 54 years old when I ever asked this question. I wonder what seeing pornography did to my little 8-year-old brain. I had
Mm.
never asked that question. And
Hmm.
what we know now is just when you see images, it's just like taking a hit of cocaine. The
Hmm.
dopamine levels that rush into your system are like that of cocaine. It's that addictive nature. So at 8 years
Mm.
old, I've got this dopamine rush that's happening, and I go back and I go back. And so, anyway, being
And
sexualized, go
I'm
ahead.
picturing this 8-year-old girl because she had the experience with Santa Claus, and now I bet you can't talk to anybody about this either because
Oh,
you might be embarrassed
there
or.
is no way. Because number one, I am looking in a place I'm not supposed to be.
Mm. Hmm.
So I was never going to tell this because I knew it was wrong to keep going
Mm.
back.
Hmm.
And then I would get in trouble. So there was a whole host of reasons. It wasn't just because I was an internal child. I knew I was doing something wrong.
Mm. Gotcha.
And then, at some point I realized that I was probably going to get caught, going there, but you still have that fascination. You still have those images in your
Hmm.
head, which by the way, really never leave. HBO came on the scene in the late
Yeah.
80s.
Uh-huh.
And of course, anything like HBO or Cinemax, that's the first thing that kind of came in the airwaves that really showed some things that kids should not see. And, so I had very little time. If you remember back, of course, you're younger than me, but in those days, in the late 80s, you usually have one TV in the house, and it
Sure.
was the size of a small SUV and like in the middle of the living room. So
Yes.
finding
Had
time.
the rabbit ears with foil on
Yes,
them. Yes.
yes.
Hmm.
And so finding time, where nobody else was around, I didn't have that opportunity much, but I
Hmm.
still had that fascination. So I look at pornography as a gateway drug. And
Hmm.
so in my later years, I really acted out on some things with in regards to the pornography
Hmm.
that really started heaping on an incredible amount of shame and guilt. I knew it was wrong. Um, and again, it was just heaping on this shame and guilt, and the enemy was right there since I didn't have the Lord
Hmm.
in my heart because I had disregarded him. The enemy
Hmm.
was just telling me, Jill, that you're just really you're depraved, you're pathetic, you're perverted.
Hmm.
And I'm probably 11 or 12 at this age.
And were
And
you still going to church?
oh, sure,
Okay.
sure, because
Hmm.
I'm an
Yeah.
obedient child.
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
a
Hmm.
believing, internal, curious, obedient child.
Hmm.
But I wasn't paying attention because
Right.
again, I wasn't investing my heart. And so, I would just, and I didn't understand the enemy. I didn't realize he was telling me I was a terrible person. That was what I thought about
Hmm.
myself. But that's
Hmm.
where we have to be careful. The enemy's voice in our ear doesn't sound demonic,
Hmm.
or we might
Yeah.
recognize that. It sounds like
Hmm.
our own voice. And so that's why, it says in Second Corinthians, we have to take every thought captive and take it through a filter, because our own thoughts can really get us messed up if they're actually from the enemy. So, but I mean, I'm 11 or 12. I don't even, if I'm not
Hmm.
paying attention to Jesus, I'm certainly not giving the enemy any credence.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
so, at this point, I'm just heaping on a lot of shame, a lot of guilt.
And this is what, 5 years now. So from eight
Yes,
to
yes.
you're
I
at
mean,
12, 11, 12
the
right
the
now.
age range gets a little fuzzy, but
Hmm.
a lot of times that pornography will lead to inappropriate games with peers. And
Okay.
that's kind of the route I went for a little bit.
Hmm.
Again, not telling anybody
Hmm.
because I knew that was so wrong. And at one point, um, I even touched a girl younger than me inappropriately. And that was the catalyst for my demise. That was, I hated myself. I knew that was so wrong, and I never did that again. But I have said before, the enemy only needs one lie. He can
Hmm.
have several, but
Hmm.
he only needs one. And that was the moment in time he knew, I've got her because she
Mm.
hates herself, and I
Mm.
will just have a heyday with her the rest of her life. And
Mhm.
that's pretty much what happened. And all this happened, before my 13th birthday. So he
Wow.
didn't care what my life looked like after that.
Mhm.
He just knew I would be broken.
Mhm.
And so,
So
moving on.
let's talk about that a little bit, Jill. So you're so around 13th birthday. I know that people that have addictions, they can't wait. So let's say like an alcoholic, right? They're
Mhm.
at work 8 to 5 and they can't wait to get home and get their drink, whatever their drink of choice is. Did you have those feelings like when you were at school, you couldn't wait to come home and look for
I
whatever?
can't really, that's when I look back,
Hmm.
that's not what I remember.
Hmm.
It's possible. It probably did not consume my thoughts. I was very
That's fine.
social.
Hmm.
And so, it wasn't that debilitating that I
Hmm.
remember.
Mm.
And again, my friends, you know, think I'm, perfectly solid on the outside.
Sure.
And so I don't remember that taking up so much thoughts,
Mhm.
but probably towards the end of the day, I'm thinking, well, maybe my parents won't be home or whatever. So
Mhm. Mhm.
that in my story is not what comes to the surface a lot.
Mhm.
Um, but obviously, when you're alone, you're asking yourself, maybe I have opportunity. And I think it's
Mhm.
the same,
Mhm.
uh, drugs or whatever. And
Mhm.
keep in mind, the older you are, I think, um, real life hits you hard. And
Mm-hmm.
so you're medicating with alcohol, with drugs, with food. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's
Sure.
another part of my story. You're medicating, and so it's more on your mind, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
When can I go get a drink because I'm at work? So
Mm-hmm.
with this, for me, it really wasn't that I was medicating anything. It was just a fascination that I found, and so maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's the difference. I don't know if that answers your question, but I
Yeah,
don't
sure. Yeah.
remember that being
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
so prevalent that it was just all consuming.
Yeah. So at 13, did you have the shame and the guilt? Was that inside you stirring?
Yes, and
Mm-hmm.
so what I did after that event that just brought me to such hatred of myself,
Mm-hmm.
I put that event in a little box, figuratively speaking, and I buried it
Mm-hmm.
because I just that could not have happened. That did not happen, and that was my secret that I needed to go away. I needed that to not have happened and not exist. And I was hoping to just move on. And so in my teenage years, if you're like me, if you have a secret and you think it's going to stay buried, it doesn't. It's like a whack-a-mole game. It keeps popping
Mm-hmm.
up. You keep trying to put it down.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, I'm thinking I need to change the narrative of who I think I am, because I can't be that person that I was at 12 or 13. And so in my teenage years, I was very promiscuous. And I think I would rather think of myself as this way,
Mm-hmm.
as easy,
Yeah.
than that. And so, but all that did was just heap on more shame and guilt. And again, I'm going to church, going to youth
Mm-hmm.
group, do not believe in Jesus. And
Is
so
that right?
that is true. That is true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
story comes at 26, and it's an amazing story.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just continue
Yes,
there.
we will get there. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so all the things I'm doing in my teenage years just add to my brokenness,
Mm-hmm.
add to my brokenness. So I do go to college, and I'm looking for wholeness, because
Mm-hmm.
at this point I'm just dying. I hate who I am. And so to me,
But nobody
wholeness,
knows this. This is just an
no,
internal feeling.
nobody
And
knows. Of course, people know that I'm a little wild in my teenage
sure.
years, but they don't know the secret.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm taking that with me to my grave, was
Mm-hmm.
my hope.
Yeah.
And so I went to college looking for wholeness. And to me, that meant my MRS degree, which I always point to my wedding ring and say my MRS degree. And I earned it in the first 6 months, basically. I met my husband in the first 6 months. We didn't marry till about 6 months later. But to me, that's what I needed for wholeness, because Jesus was not that, because again, I still didn't believe.
Mm-hmm. So I have
And
to ask you, why do you call it the MRS degree?
that's just something I've said from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't finish college, so I did not get a degree.
Okay.
But maybe that's it. Maybe that's psychological.
You've been married a long time. I think you deserve a
38
degree. Yeah.
years.
38
And
years.
so I
That's a
earned
degree.
my degree in college. That's what I earned in college. Maybe
Yeah.
that's why. That's a great question. Maybe it's psychological that I never earned a real degree. So I did earn something.
You did.
And
There you
praise
go.
God that I did.
Yes.
But one of the things about me in childhood, I was also very fearful, because if Jesus isn't real, and I kept thinking about dying a lot when I was young, and if Jesus isn't real and heaven isn't real, when you die, how long is eternity? Do you know that those thoughts plagued my mind? Well, when I'm in my 20s, newly married, I still have a fear of dying, because again, I haven't made the connection with Jesus. So when I got married and I couldn't tell him my secret, I wanted him to just love me for what I could present to him. We loved each other greatly.
Right. I want to ask you a question real quick. We'll put a pin in the college thing, because I want to go back to, you've been in church all your life. And they talk. I assume that they're bringing up God and Jesus in the religion that you in the religion that you had. Sunday school, youth group,
all the things.
Jesus, God. You pray, you raise your hand. I don't know if you went through the motions of you accept Jesus in your heart type of thing. If that was just a motion for you, or you just never did it. Was it a dead church? Like, why do you think it never clicked?
No, it was not a dead church at all. I was raised Methodist, so baptism in the Methodist church comes when you're a baby. So I was sprinkled as a baby.
I
So
see.
there is no, I mean, there are confirmation classes when you're 13. So that is when you have all the knowledge of Jesus and dedicate your life. But again, so here's the thing. I heard about Jesus. I sang all the songs, but I did not invest my heart because
That's
I
good.
thought it was all a lie. And one day everybody else is going to find out it's a lie. And I'm going to be the one going, could have told you, could have told you. So
Good.
it wasn't any church's fault. It
Mhm.
was not any denomination's fault. It was the fact that I did not invest my heart. I heard it all, but I thought, nope, not me again. So, I
Mhm.
mean, that's kind of how that plays out. How do you spend all this time in church
Mhm.
and not get it? Well, it's because if you don't invest your heart and you don't believe, that's exactly how that can happen.
Mm. Did you
But
consider yourself like an atheist or agnostic or anything, or you just didn't
no, I didn't
believe?
even know what those words meant.
Okay. Yeah.
I didn't know
Mm.
what those words meant.
Mhm.
I was just kind of numb.
Mhm. Mm.
Again, growing up, I already had a numbness in my heart from
Mm.
the secret I had. And so I think I was just trying to eke out an existence. I knew I wanted to get married. I had a great example from my parents. They were married. I have one sibling. We had a great childhood. I always compare it to like the Norman Rockwell paintings. It,
Mm.
looked pretty quaint and pretty
Mhm.
good.
Sure.
And I was loved. And so I desired that and I wanted to have kids. And so when Terry and I got married, I
Mhm.
mean,
Okay, so now we'll go to college.
I'll lead you up to the point where
Yes.
Jesus opened
So
my
how
eyes.
did you meet him? We have to start with all
Oh,
that.
okay, okay. Well, I will say our love story's in the book.
Okay.
But he was a two-sport athlete in college. We met at ASU in Jonesboro, Arkansas. And so he was a senior and I was a freshman. And I was with my sorority sisters at a football game, a bonfire before a Saturday football game.
Mhm.
And so across the firelight, it's so romantic. It's not even
Mhm.
it's amazing. So across the firelight, I see him
Mm.
standing with all of his football players. And there was a lot of guys there, but my eyes were fixed on him. So I saw him and made the comment to my sorority sister who was standing next to me, wow, who's that? And she said, well, I'm dating his roommate. I'll fix you up. And I'm like, okay. So Terry and I can joke that I saw him and sought after it, but he doesn't necessarily remember it that way. He thinks he saw me one other time playing maybe flag football. And I'm like, well, you didn't pursue. So
Right. So my
I'm at
story's
least
better since you didn't pursue.
so that's how we met
Mhm.
right before, actually, it was right after homecoming,
Okay.
my freshman year. And then we started dating and we were married by the following August.
Okay.
And
Wow.
so, I was all in with that because again, that was what was going to bring me wholeness. It was going to bring me
Mhm.
purpose. And that
Mhm.
equaled wholeness in my
Mhm.
mind.
Mhm.
But as great as our marriage was, I was still empty. I still had a hole in me. And I thought, well, I
Mhm.
need to be a mom.
Mhm.
And so, right.
Did Terry go to church?
Yes, he was raised in church. He was raised in
Okay.
a very legalistic church. And
Okay.
so his view of God was not the grace-filled God that I have come
Mm.
to know, and he has come to know.
Mhm.
He was
Mhm.
more of a, if you do this, you're condemned
Mhm.
to hell. It was kind of it was really
God's
legalistic.
strict and not loving. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And he is a child of trauma as well. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, it's amazing how God would bring two broken kids
Mm.
together
Mhm.
and, to have a great purpose. Well, we
Mhm.
certainly didn't see that at the
Yeah.
time. We just loved
So
each other.
so in college, it wasn't like he was this big Christian and we're gonna go to church and we're gonna do. You
Well,
guys just tell a little bit
no.
about that you guys how
So
you
we really,
evolved.
when we first got married,
Mhm.
church was not a priority. But when we had our daughter Jessica, just a year after we got married, because again, I needed to be a mom for
Mhm.
wholeness. It's funny. That's how God, pushed me into church because that's what you do. You
Mm.
take your children to church
Mhm.
because that's what was modeled for me. Again, I don't have an understanding or a belief in God, but by this time, to be honest, I have forgotten why I have not invested my heart in the Lord.
Mm. Okay.
That part didn't stay with me. It was just I just had this hard heart. I guess I wasn't unloving. I just it just wasn't sinking in. But God was working because again, you have a child. Well, that's what you do. You take them to church. So we were hit or miss with church, but it was important. And then after Jessica was probably 3.5 or 4, I was still broken on the inside. I was supposed to be whole with being a wife and a mother, but I
Mm-hmm.
still had this hole. So I thought, you know
Mm-hmm.
what? We need a boy and a girl. So we tried again for our second child, and we had a boy. And so to me, this was perfect
Perfect
wholeness.
family. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it absolutely did not fill that black hole in
Mm-hmm.
my heart. And I was 26 at this point. And though my children are amazing, and we have since,
Mm-hmm.
I always forget to talk about Maddie. We had a third child later.
The third one always gets
She's
missed.
like,
I
Mom,
have one
I
too.
exist.
Poor
Tell
kid. Yeah.
people I exist. Anyway, so she exists. But at this point, we had two. We had a boy and a girl, and that was supposed to be it. But at that point, all I knew was nothing was going to fill that hole but Jesus. And so you say, well, how does that even work? Okay, so here's how that works. I still fear dying. And it was I believe it was in 1991, September of 1991. It's a beautiful fall day in the Ozarks. And I'm driving, and I have my 18-month-old son in the back. I say he's 18 months. He's in the back. He's little.
Mm-hmm.
And I start thinking about dying again all of a sudden as I'm driving.
Mm-hmm.
And
Were you depressed inside? Like what were you
I would
thinking
not have
emotionally?
called it that. I would
Okay.
not have called it depressed. I was a very thoughtful, well, again, introspective.
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking about dying again, and all those familiar feelings of doom and dread. And because now it's forever without my husband and my children. So it takes on a new spin that particular day. But here's the thing. There was my darkness. There was the level of depression, if you want to call it, that particular day. And God literally opened my eyes. I have never had a vision before, and I'm not sure if it was necessarily a vision, but I saw and heard God say, Jill, you need to know that I am real. You need to know that my son is real, and with him, heaven is real. And he met me in my darkest point based on that fear. And I believed in that moment. And so,
while you're driving.
While I'm driving.
Wow.
So there was no time to bow my head and pray. Just we're in the mountains of the Ozarks. So
did it bring tears to
your
eyes?
Pardon me?
Did it bring tears?
I think I was just in awe. I don't remember if tears fell. I think I was just like, what just happened? What just happened? But so from that moment on, I really became like a sponge when we were in church, because for 26 years, I had not paid attention. I had not really read my Bible. I was like a sponge to every class, every teaching. And so, that was that was when God opened my eyes to the truth. So that.
Oh, I think we lost her.
Are we having issues?
Oh, hey, I still hear you.
There.
We are. You said that. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. You said that's when God opened your eyes to the truth. This is probably we're going to have internet, because the devil's like, oh, no, she's not. But go ahead.
Okay.
You drop, we'll wait for you.
Hopefully this signal remains. But that's when I came to the Lord and really, got his forgiveness. And, he redeemed me at that point. And so I started a relationship of falling in love with the Lord, since I had neglected him for so long. But again,
how did you talk to him really quick, Jill? How did you like have a conversation? Hey, God, this is me. And like, how did you connect with God and ask for forgiveness and get that wholeness? Like, what does that look like?
To be honest, there was not a time that I prayed that sweet salvation prayer. So later in my life, when I'm looking back, knowing I'm a follower of Christ, and I'm looking for that moment that I prayed that prayer, because, we think that's the only way to do it, is if you pray that prayer of salvation. I didn't have that moment. And so I started asking God to show me that moment, because really I had forgotten about the vision on the highway, because again, without a prayer, could that really have been it? Sure. So, I started a practice of journaling my prayers not too long, probably 3 years after I became a believer. And so to me, that was the way I communicated, because they became my love letters to the Lord. And so I was communicating. And for an internal person, that's a pretty good way of getting things out.
And what does that look like? When you're journaling, is it like, hey, God, what's up? Like, what is it just on your mind? You just start writing? What's that look like?
picture writing a letter. Now, people journal in different ways, so there's no right way or wrong way. But for me, and I'd also, when I was fairly young believer, heard about the ACTS acronym. The A is for adoration, the C is for confession, T for Thanksgiving, and S for supplication. So I kind of needed a guide, and that came along at the right time. So, but it's like, dear Lord, and then I started into praises. I praise you for who you are. And again, my first prayer journal entry was 1 paragraph long. That's it.
Okay.
Now today I can do pages and pages, but you got to start somewhere. So my communication skills with
so even at 1 page, you're still getting it on paper and talking.
So my communication skills with an almighty God started off really slow, but he met me right there. But what is important to understand is when, and I came to the cross figuratively, really without a prayer, but I unearthed that secret that I had, that box, and I brought it to the Lord to forgive. So when I knew I needed forgiveness, I brought everything and laid it at his feet, figuratively. And at that moment, he wants me to leave it there because it's forgiven, it's paid for. But that is such a vulnerable thing for me. I take that back and I do it again. And I'm really just saying, Lord, I love you. You love me. That's forgiven. Let's leave it there. Let's move on. And so I had to refute all the lies and say, Lord, I believe I'm your child. I believe I'm cherished, beloved, all these things, no matter how I feel. Because there's the kicker. The enemy, when he's exposed, he doesn't just pick up his toys and go away pouting. He retreats for a time, but only to re-strategize. I knew the book was supposed to have something about my prayer journals, because every time I would tell my husband that, I'm not a writer, he would look at me and look at all my prayer journals from back in 1994 when I started. He goes, really? You're not a writer? Look at all your prayer journals. I'm like, well, that's not writing. Well, anyway, and I have to say, he is an amazing writer, and he can just think it and it's on paper. It doesn't work that way with me. So, but I did go back and I realized, okay, I think some of this journaling and some of this is part of the book. So I'd start writing something and then it wouldn't go anywhere. And I'm like, Lord, am I being disobedient? Am I missing this? And all I could do was label that little portion like, okay, there's a pamphlet that might help people, but it wasn't a book. And so I would kind of put that away. The enemy was saying, wow, how disobedient are you? But it wasn't. I knew I was doing all I could. And then a couple years later, 2018, I kind of did the same thing. I went back and looked, wrote some more. But again, it didn't go anywhere. And it wasn't too long after that. This had happened like 3 times. I'm like, segments. I'm like, what is this, Lord? I can't even get any further. And he brought to my mind that all of it was a part of a whole. Everything I was doing in 2014, 2016, 2018 was a part of what's going to come. So it was in 2021, I believe. So I say I'm not a writer. I mean, the last time I had written a paper was in college, in the 80s, and I did it on a typewriter. Basically, there was no computer. Well, the Lord. So I said, you're going to have to help me. So what's he do? He sends me back to school at College of the Ozarks in Branson as a student.
As a student,
I have to take comp again, the language arts. I have to take a writing class. Yeah. And it's very intimidating, to go back through grammar and everything like that. But, that was his plan. I didn't know it at the time. But so I went through that class and got some grammar touch-ups. But then I had to start writing biblical papers. And you talk about nervous, because that's a very big insecurity for me. But I did it with the Lord's help. And that kind of gave me confidence. So after my time at college was when he finally gave me the opportunity to start writing. And it's amazing. Someone gifted me a writing coach. I mean, that's something I would have never paid for. I don't invest in myself. And my new stepfather is a writer. And so I was picking his brain one day, and he offered to pay for my writing coach. And I was done.
Wow.
Right. The Lord knew, because how many years did I pray?
Sure.
Hey, I'll do it, but you got to help me. Well, it took me about a year. I think I started in June of 2001, and then the book was published in June of 2022. And, the process was grueling for me. there are times that I said, Lord, I don't even like how I'm writing.
Mm.
And, I could just hear him say, I didn't ask you to like it. I asked you to write it.
Just
And
do
that's
it.
why I
Yeah.
brought you Rebecca, because she's going to help tighten your sentences up. And, that was enough of the help that I needed to get that. And it's not a very big book.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the other thing as I'm writing it. I'm like, Lord, this isn't going to be very big. It's not very meaty. And so apparently somehow I equated a big book with really good quality meat. But, the Lord was saying,
What's you say? Good things come in little packages.
exactly. But what does the
Mm-hmm.
enemy say? Well,
Mm-hmm.
that's a slight little bit, this is
Mm-hmm.
so
Sure.
and this is,
Yeah.
I've been walking free for 21 years at this point. The enemy's still there, girls, men and women, not girls.
Yeah.
The enemy's still there. He wanted me to definitely not write this book. So anyway, so when I send it off to the publisher, or actually that's not true. I self-publish it, but when I sent it into to Amazon KDP, when they sent me my first proof back, it came in the mail, and I picked up the envelope and I felt it. And the Lord was just right there with me. I was in the post office and he said, what does it feel like? And I said, it feels really small.
Mm.
And he said, well, I've moved mountains with just one word.
Mm.
Well, you sure do.
Mm-hmm.
So as I'm walking out of the post office back home, I realize, so here's a tagline he gave me. If you need hope and healing between dinner and bedtime, this book's for you.
Mm.
So and so many people after the fact have read it and said, Jill, I appreciate that it's so small because I don't have a lot of time to sit down and read a lot. So yeah, it's pretty much my story. And then again, the best part that makes God the star of my story is look what he